Welcome back to another edition of Bring Me the Sports on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Today we're talking a little more Gophers football, and it is the transfer portal season. The transfer portal season is in full swing, and the Gophers were very, very busy this weekend, adding commitments from 8 more players leading into today on Monday, adding to the 2 previous commitments they got last week. So let's break it all down, see where they all fit in, and talk a little roster construction heading into the season. So, right off the bat, first player that the Gophers got to commit. So this is on top of the 2 players they got last week, which was Zach Pyron, the quarterback from Georgia Tech. Had a whole video on the Gophers quarterback situation. We won't be touching on that too much today. Go check that out on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. And then Drew Biber, the Purdue tight end. So those 2 guys were already committed during the week, and they added 7 more commitments on Sunday and then 1 on Monday. So we're going to talk about the Sunday and Monday commitments. And right off the bat, the first one was Stephen Curtis, defensive end from Illinois State. On paper, he's not. You wouldn't think that he's highly regarded coming from the FCS level, but some sites view him as one of the more highly touted players that the Gophers picked up on Sunday. According to 24/7 Sports, he's the 141st ranked player in the transfer portal. And he's a really talented guy, but he joins a position group now at defensive end that has Jackson Howard, Lucas Finnessy, Anthony Smith, and now Stephen Curtis. Those are 4 guys that have the potential to start. I'm very confident that Anthony Smith will obviously start, but next to him, it's pretty open. Jackson Howard is the most heralded high school prospect. He probably has the highest ceiling. But Lucas Finnessy played the most last year out of that group, and then Stephen Curtis is kind of the wild card there. So they go legitimately 4 deep of 4 Big Ten level defensive ends, which is something you want on the defensive line. And that's huge heading into this year after losing Jaw Joyner and Denny Strickhouse. So that's a big pickup. Defensive end, shirt up. That's a really solid position right now. And Stephen Curtis is a good pickup. He had other offers to Kentucky, I think he visited, and then Boston College and Cincinnati. He also had offers from, but that's a big addition. I think it might get swept under the rug by a lot of positional skill position guys that we'll get into, but Curtis, big addition to the defensive line for Winston Delattipadere III and the Gophers defense. So after that, another defensive player, NC Central transfer, Jalen Bowden, another guy from the FCS ranks. So I found this one interesting because the Gophers the last 2 years have brought in a quarterback from the FCS ranks. They had in 2022 Trayvon Jones from Elon, great number 2 next to Justin Wally. Really worked out for him. 1-year rental thing again. This year they have Bowden from NC Central. He's a bit undersized weight wise. He's probably 180 pounds soaking wet. But 6'2", great length. And he's been a pretty good tackler, which is something that Robinson and Trayvon Jones were both really good at. So that'll be worth monitoring. But the quarterback position still has a lot of question marks, but a lot of talent. So it's an interesting one for the Gophers right now after adding Bowden. So, in my opinion, I think the Gophers will want him to be their number 1 or number 2 option. And you have Zaquan Bryan expected to return, who played a lot last year at the outside corner position, kind of the number 3 corner. Now he's kind of thrusted in that number 2 role. And then you have Rylan Kelly, a guy who's played a little bit. And then Jayonte McMillan's probably more of the slot cornerback role. But that's still, I guess, a step back from the unit that the Gophers had this year with Wally and Robinson, which was arguably one of the better cornerback duos in the Big Ten. I don't think they're going to get that level of play next year unless they add another guy, which wouldn't stun me, but Bowden's a good place to start. And it's not necessarily a weakness on this team, but it's definitely not one of their strengths. He has experience, and I think he can perform at the Big Ten level, but a lot of question marks there. He chose Minnesota over Wake Forest, James Madison, FAU, so he was kind of more of a group of five guy that the Gophers got him from. Ethan Robinson last year, Gophers not outbid, but out recruited Arkansas, USC, Auburn. So he was a highly touted transfer guy. Bowden, not necessarily the same, but I'm not saying that to be down on him. I think he's still impressive player, good pickup, but different caliber player to Robinson, but still the same trajectory now, FCS to Big Ten. So that's an interesting one to watch. And then after that, the Gophers got us started with a lot of skill position guys. Started with A.J. Turner, running back from Marshall, the number one ranked player in this class now for the Gophers, in this portal class. Really, really exciting running back, high potential. He was considering North Carolina, didn't even make it to his North Carolina visit. So he really all in on the Gophers. 6 foot, 195 pounds. He had 864 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. Also added a little work on the ground. He'll have 2 years of eligibility remaining, but his skill set's big plays. 8.3 yards per carry last year, which led the FBS. And he was a big play waiting to happen on that Marshall team that won the Sun Belt. Really one of the better group of five teams last year. 15.38% of his carries went for 10 plus yards, which is a crazy mark. And 28.8% of his 104 carries were first downs, which is kind of crazy. But so after losing now Marcus Major to graduation, Jaron Magnum to graduation, and Cy Bangura and Jordan Newman to the transfer portal, I would make the argument that the Gophers upgraded at the running back position. I think Turner presents a different skill set that Major had last year. Major was kind of wouldn't fumble the ball, wouldn't make a mistake. He had a couple big plays, but Turner is like the Gophers need to figure out how to get him 8 to 10 touches a game on top of Darius Taylor coming back. Because Turner's the type of guy you just need the ball in his hands. And maybe this will become the run first team that we saw in years past. That'll be a discussion heading into the season now with some inexperience at the quarterback position. But Turner's a guy that, man, I'm just excited to see him in a Gophers uniform. And I guess now we'll get into the running backs in general. So they also added Washington transfer Cameron Davis, who was at Washington for 6 years. So this will be his 7th year, a lot like kind of Major and Magnum last year. Really experienced guys, probably 24, 25. He's had over 1,000 yards. In 2022, he was really good at Washington. He had 13 touchdowns that year, I think, and then he got hurt 2023, redshirted that year, and then came back 2024. Proved that he's still a serviceable running back. And I think right now, if I had to handicap the situation, I think he'd be the number 3 option based on his experience heading into the year. Kind of like something we saw from Jaron Magnum. I don't think you experience or went into this video thinking you were going to hear 4 or 5 Jaron Magnum references, a guy who had like 5 carries last year, but the Gophers had a similar approach last year. They brought 3 guys in from the portal, Major, Bangura, and Magnum. And what was interesting is in the offseason, people look at the stats and they say Bangura probably will be the number 2 guy. Didn't work out. Major earned the number 2 role. I think that'll be a little different this year. I think Turner, I'd be pretty surprised if Turner wasn't the number 2 guy, if he obviously remains committed and is at the program, but because he's just a special talent. But I think the question then would be Davis or Michigan transfer Cole Cabana that they just got, former 4-star recruit who was ranked higher than Darius Taylor in high school. Same recruiting class, both from Michigan. So that's an interesting aspect there, but he'll have 3 years of eligibility left. Former top 200 guy coming out of high school, really talented guy who just didn't crack the depth chart at Michigan. They got plenty of running backs. We know that. Blake Corum last year, Donovan Edwards, Khalil Mullins this year. Really talented running back room. So it's hard for anyone to break through there. So he's kind of the wild card in this whole equation because if he comes in and the Gophers are like, man, we got a steal. How's this guy coming in our program at RB3, RB4? He could jump Davis, and then he could flirt with Turner maybe. Who knows? He's kind of the wild card. And then it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't even record a single carry this year. I should say in 2025. But that'll be an interesting one to follow because you can make the argument he's the most talented guy in that room based on high school accolades. But now they realistically go 4 deep. A guy like maybe even 5 deep. A guy like Fame Ejioboy, who 2 weeks ago looked like he might compete for that number 2 or number 3 role, has now got bumped down to 4 or 5. So I think the future is kind of Ejioboy, Cabana, and Jaden Wright. And then the present's kind of Taylor, Turner, and Cameron Davis. That can change. Last year, I thought Bangora was going to be the number 2 guy, but Major earned it in the spring and the preseason. So if we know anything, that can change. And I think PJ has shown that practice on the field, the buy-in is what matters. So that could obviously change. But that's kind of what I see the running back room like. And yeah, a clear upgrade in my opinion. I think Turner is just as good as Major, if not better. And I think Cameron Davis is just as good as Newman, if not better. And then you throw Cole Cabana in there, who's, I think, an upgrade from Bangura or Jaron Magnum. And he kind of makes the loss of Shane Marshall, the talented true freshman that flipped on national signing day, he makes that loss a little easier to accept now because he's got 3 years of eligibility left. And if Taylor's done after 2025, now they got plenty of talent in that room. Turner, a guy who could come back. Let's say he has a big year again. Maybe he gets that 600 total yards offense, 6 touchdowns. Let's say he gets that. Gophers can be like, hey, come back. We'll make that 1,200 yards. And then you got Cabana behind him. And then you got Fame Ejioboy. So I think the Gophers are planning ahead, and this time next year, it might not be this huge exodus at the position. And I think they're set up pretty well for the future now at the running back position. So after that, if Turner was the top addition, the number 2 addition was easily Miami of Ohio transfer wide receiver Kevon Tracy, former first team All MAC receiver last year for the Red Hawks. He'll come into Minnesota now and almost immediately compete for that number 1 role. He had 57 catches for 818 yards and 7 touchdowns last season. So the Gophers, we all know, losing Daniel Jackson, losing Elijah Spencer. Both those guys are out of eligibility, so they are off to the next level. Who's going to be their number 1 receiver next year? Lamecki Brockington has already said that he plans to return. Christian Driver has already said that he plans to return. I think the Gophers ideally would want both of those guys as complementary pieces. We've seen Brockington take over a game back in 2022 against Wisconsin, and he's a big play waiting to happen. Really good run blocker, but I think the Gophers like him more as a secondary, tertiary option in the wide receiver room. Christian Driver, a guy that they try to get involved a little bit last year, maybe get a little bit more involved this year, but I think Tracy has the traits to be the number 1 guy. 6 foot, 220 pounds, big dude. He has a similar skill set to a Daniel Jackson, and who he really reminds me of is Corey Crooms back in 2023, that would have been. He was a Western Michigan guy. Wasn't an all-conference player at Western Michigan, but he did have a little similar production as Tracy. An interesting note with Tracy is he is the younger brother of Giants running back Tyrone Tracy, which is kind of cool. Yeah, but so I think the floor for Tracy is Corey Crooms. Corey Crooms had 28 catches for 376 in his 1 year with Minnesota. But the year before that, he had a similar stat line to what Tracy did last year. He had 57 catches, 814, and 5 in his last year at Western Michigan. So still a lot to happen this offseason. And maybe the Gophers aren't as pass heavy next year, and they want to use all those running backs they just got. And Tracy can be their number one guy and maybe be around that 800-yard range. They don't need, at least right now, based on their roster, they don't need a true alpha number one 1,200-yard guy because they got a lot of question marks at quarterback. And it'll be an interesting year. But I think Tracy's got the talent to be the number one guy. Big pickup. I think it was exactly what they needed. I think he's a Midwest guy. Doesn't seem like a diva by any means. Like some of these receivers are starting to become even in college, but he seems like a perfect Gophers wide receiver. Seems like he's ready to get down and dirty. Big Ten guy, played in the MAC. I just love everything about this pickup. I think he fits their system really well, and he fills a huge need. Experience, size, traits. It all matches up really well. And I think that's what PJ Fleck and his staff are starting to figure out in the portal, that it's not all about stars and talent. It's about fit. And they got a lot of guys that fit their system so far. And Tracy might be at the top of that bill. He just reminds me so, because he's not this like world class athlete. He reminds me so much of the Bateman, Tyler Johnson, Chris Ottman-Bell, Daniel Jackson type player, that he's not going to go out there and run a 4.3. He's not 6'5", but he's going to run every single route in the route tree, and he's going to do it at a high level. So I think this was a really good pickup for the Gophers, and one that honestly kind of surprised me. I didn't think they would get this guy. I thought he'd go maybe even SEC, top level Big Ten, maybe like a Michigan or Ohio State. Like, he's that good. But that I just mentioned, Gophers brought in a kicker / punter, Brady Denberg, who worked with the Gophers special teams coordinator Bob Ligashevsky at Syracuse. So he'll come in and compete for that kicker role in 2024. That'll be one worth monitoring, but that was kind of one that got lost in the shuffle. And then lastly, on Monday, the Gophers got a commitment from Stony Brook defensive tackle transfer Rushawn Lawrence, another guy now to that defensive line that I am getting to the point that I think it might be better in 2025 than it was in 2024. So Gophers are losing Jaw Joyner, Danny Strigal, like I said earlier, but they're returning everyone else on that defensive line, and now they've added 2 transfers. I think Rushawn Lawrence can compete. It'll be interesting because, I mean, Devin Easter and Jalen Logan Redding were 2 really solid starters last year, and now Lawrence comes in only 1 year of eligibility, and you think it'd be the number 3 guy, and I think that's kind of what the Gophers want him to be. But now they got depth at the interior, which is, he kind of fills Darnell Jeffries, and I think that might be an upgrade at that position too. So that defensive line strength of this team, I think, no holes there, high potential. You got guys like Anthony Smith that could be borderline all conference next year. We know Jackson Howard has the talent. Maybe he takes a huge step up, and then you got man, really high potential on that defensive line. If you're looking for something to be excited about, it's that defensive line. If Smith continues to improve, if Howard takes a big leap, plays to his high school recruiting level, we could be looking at 2 NFL players on that defensive line. So that'll be interesting to watch for sure. Lawrence, a great addition, great depth piece. Not going to shake up the Big Ten by any means, but those are the positions you need to do, because now the Gophers can have an injury there, and that's how football works. No one wants to talk about the injuries, but it happens, and it happens to everyone every year. And now the Gophers would be able to sustain something if it were to happen at either of those positions. So lastly, before I get going here, the Gophers did lose their first significant contributor to the transfer portal. You watch this video and you're like, oh, the Gophers going to add anyone else? They need to add offensive line, at least one guy up front. Philip Daniels, who was a redshirt freshman this year, started the final 4 games of the year at right tackle. He was slated to be a starter in 2025. He's hitting the portal. Um, I did not get a reason for that. Maybe he's going to a big school because he's that level of talent. He could go top tier Big Ten. He could go to the SEC. So that'll be an interesting one to follow. But Gophers have to replace his starter there. He was going to start at one of the tackle positions. So up front, now the guys you have returning, Greg Johnson, full-time starter at center. He could start at center again this year. But again, he has the versatility to start elsewhere. Ashton Beers started 8 games at guard. He'll start at one of the guard spots. But outside of that, Martez Lewis, who started a lot of games at tackle and guard, he's coming back. I think he's made 14 starts in his career. So, but he was benched in the middle or at the start of 2024. So he has 1 year of eligibility left. He'll be an interesting guy to keep an eye on to see what he does. But so that leaves 2 spots for the Gophers. I think one guy to definitely keep an eye on is Nathan Roy, who'll be a redshirt freshman. He was the 6th highest ranked high school commit in Gophers history in the internet era, and he has the ability. He's probably more of a guard, but let's say he has a big offseason. You slot him at guard. That interior then with Greg Johnson, Ashton Beers, and Nathan Roy would be good, but a lot of inexperience, a lot of youth there. So you have Aluma and Kelly from UTEP, who you added from the portal last year, who did not play at all this year. Maybe he takes a step up. You have guys you can throw in there, but a proven guy like Daniels would have been huge. That he has the potential to be an Ariante Ursary level. Now you don't have that anymore. So um, adding a guy like that would be big for the offensive line. And I think it's their biggest question and biggest need now heading into the rest of the portal season. Overall, I think the Gophers got much better. They technically have lost 10 players overall to the portal, and they've added 10. And I think anyone who's knows anything about these 20 players would say the Gophers roster got better, arguably substantially better. And they filled some big needs at a lot of positions. But like I said, I think if they can get maybe one receiver, maybe Malachi Coleman from Nebraska, I think they're still in the mix there. And I think he could be the number 2 guy then. And then you put Brockington and Driver back in that slot role or the number 3 role. Brockington didn't play much slot last year, but that would really shore up the offensive weapons completely. And then it's just one more offensive lineman, I think, is the biggest thing they need. And then Cody Lindenberg, if he returns too, that's something to monitor. I could see maybe 2 or 3 more players they add, maybe a corner, maybe a linebacker, maybe a wide receiver, maybe an offensive lineman. Those would be the 4 positions. If they don't, I don't think it's the end of the world. If they don't add an offensive lineman, it's a big question mark up front. But if they do, that would answer a lot of questions. So overall, really, really, really good start to the transfer portal. Cannot give PJ Fleck enough credit. You can have his skepticism as a game coach, but the last 14 to 15 months as a pure roster construction um, coaching staff, Fleck and his staff couldn't be much better, really, for a school like Minnesota. Last cycle, adding Coy Parrish, Brosmer, Jackson Howard, and then this cycle, getting guys like AJ Turner, Javon Tracy, Cole Cabana. That's what Big Ten programs do, and Fleck has begun to do that. He's adopted the transfer portal, and I think he's starting to figure it out. Improved NIL for the team overall. Really impressive stuff from a talent acquisition aspect and a roster construction aspect. I think he's retaining all these guys. The Daniels was a big loss. I will say that, but every program in the country has at least one of those, and I think it was pretty naive to think they weren't going to have one. But great start to the offseason, in all honesty. The high school recruiting class on signing day was a little down, but this start to the portal, I think, makes up for that. You got a lot of guys with extra eligibility, too. You're not getting just 1 year rentals. And you extend Corey Heatherman, and we'll get into it more this offseason, but I think you thought 2024 was boomer bust. I think 2025 is extreme boomer bust. That they could have an Indiana type year, or they could be 5-7. It'll be interesting to worth monitoring because the quarterback position, there's just so many questions there, and assuming that it's going to just be a smooth transition would be a bit naive. But um, yeah, it'll be interesting to follow. This is a great start to the offseason. Make sure to like and subscribe to Bring Me the Sports. Helps us get found, helps more people watch the videos. I appreciate you guys for listening, and until next time.